Hi, and welcome to the second video that goes over the settings for the ZachTek WSPR configuration. In the first one, we just got you started. You put in your call sign and you picked a few bands and pressed the start button and off you went. In this one, we will go over into the more nitty-gritty and look at the advanced settings. You do not usually need these advanced settings. They are for special cases. But I'll go over them so to reduce the confusion and get you to understand what all the bells and whistles are really for. But before we start, I'll say that what you see here on the right side, which is the status window, I will not tell anything about that in this video. Just know that it's information that is nice to know, but you do not need to know them. It's just there in case you want to figure something out. So there will probably be a third video, perhaps a fourth video, but we'll go over all of this in detail. But for this video, we'll keep it a bit shorter and we'll go over the schedule, the location settings, power settings, and we also discussed the call sign prefix and suffix. So let's start with the schedule. And also let me say that the top options that you see here is the default option and usually the most needed option or the most used option. So for example, power, you just usually use this in the top option. And for 95% of the users, this top option would be the thing that you use. So don't feel that you have to learn this or you have to listen to this video. This is just so that you can get an idea of what all the other stuff is. All right, so transmit schedule. Why would you like to change that? If you have the 2-minute schedule, and that means the one transmission takes 2 minutes, actually slightly less, 1 minute and 51 seconds. And if you have that, and you have ticked a few bands here, and you have set this, perhaps you have many bands, and you have set the pause to 0, it means it takes 2 minutes to do the 40-minute band and 2 minutes for 30, and it will do that, and then it will start over again. And it means that you will get the maximum, your transmitter to be maximum time in the air. So 30 transmission packages for each hour then it would mean. So usually you would do that. You would like to have that. You want to be able to transmit on as many bands that you can, and you start all over once you're done. If you set it to a 10-minute schedule, that means it will transmit every 10 minutes. So that means only 6 transmission on an hour. And what minute you pick here doesn't change that fact. It will only be 6 transmissions, but they can start at different times. So these are the 5 different options you have. If you start at minute 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, that's what will happen. And that's regardless of what band. So if you have several band enabled, first band will occur on minute 0, second band 10 minutes later, third band another 10 minutes later. So you will not be able to go over more than 6 band in an hour here. So that's a bit peculiar, and so that's also telling you that these are mostly useful for 1 or 2 bands. So for example, if you want to just be on the 20 meter band like that, that's usually the case when I use this schedule, just 1 or 2 band enabled. So the use case for this, let's just go over the 20-minute schedule. It's the same. It's just instead of having the transmitter start every 10 minutes, it's starting every 20 minutes. So it's just 3 transmission on an hour. But you get more options then, more different options to choose from. Why would you like to limit so that you only transmit every 10 minutes? Well, the neat thing is you know exactly when it is transmitting and when it's not transmitting, and that could be useful. There is two cases, uh, and they're usually around having multiple transmitters operating. Say, for example, you have two transmitters. Perhaps you want to operate them, um, but you do not want them to transmit at the same time. Why would that be? Well, maybe you have the same call sign and you just want to be able to separate them out in some way. Or maybe more likely, you have two transmitters and they are connected to, say, for example, two different antennas, and you do want them to transmit exactly at the same time. Then you would set both transmitters to the same schedule so that when they do transmit, they you can then observe on the receiving end both transmitters at exactly the same time, meaning they have the same propagation probably. But the propagation changes over time, so if you force them to transmit exactly at the same time, you will be able to do very good comparison of them and minimizing the propagation error that occurs over time. So, for example, you have your two antennas, and they are slightly different antennas. You put one antenna on one transmitter, another on another transmitter, and you have them transmit using the same schedule. That's a very useful thing to do. And then to be able to use the same call sign, you will use a suffix for them and have them using different suffix. We'll go over that a bit later. But so that's probably the most useful thing for having a 10 or 20-minute schedule, using multiple transmitters and having them transmit at the same time so that you can compare them. Uh, and also in ballooning, I do sell a very lightweight transmitter called the Pico, and in that case, there's a web page that does a bit of a decoding of all its transmission and plots it on a map and figure out its altitude and all of that. And to be able to do that, it needs to understand when it's transmitting or not. And so in that case, you will set a schedule and you will tell that web page what schedule you are using. And it's better able to pick out the data then. Okay, so these are the special cases. As I say, if you have just one transmitter, probably you don't want to use them, but if you have several, they could be quite useful to having them transmit at the same time. Okay, so let's talk about the band coordinated schedule. The band coordinated schedule came about several years ago, and it was an add-on to the Whisper software that was created by Joe Taylor, the inventor of Whisper and the Whisper protocol. So at that time, there were not many, if any, dedicated Whisper transmitter or Whisper receivers. Everyone was using their own transceivers, their full ham transceivers, and that was usually connected to a computer. The audio was routed into the computer, and the WSJT software were then running the decode and transmit thing, and you could then set it to transmit every now and then, but mostly to keep it in receive mode, and then that's how they ran it. So the problem then becomes, if you're listening to just one band at the time, you will miss out on the action on the other bands. So he wanted to have a way of having the receiver jump around on different bands and then coordinate this so that the jump was then synchronized on all the receivers around the world. So all the receivers were then listening to the same band at a certain time. So that's what band coordinated schedule is. It's everyone listens or transmits on a specific band on a specific time, and then they jump around in time. So you can press this I to see the information I have here. So let's just start saying that 160 meter is the lowest one you will transmit on. You would then transmit on this band on minute 0, 20, and 40. So say you started out at the top of the hour and you transmitted on 160 minute, or let's just say it's a receiver. So the receiver you have is connected to your computer. It's tuned to 160 meter, and after these 2 minutes are over, so the start of the next 2 minutes cycle, the software would command the receiver to shift and go to another band, to go to the 80 meter band. And after 2 minutes, it will go to the 60 meter band, 40 meter, etc., until it has jumped on each band up to the 10 meter, and then it will start over again and go over to 160 meters. So all the receivers would do this at the same time. So if you wanted to transmit, say you wanted to transmit on a 20 meter band here, you would make sure only to do that on minutes 10, 30, or 50. Because if you use these minutes, you would be sure that the maximum amount of receivers would be on that frequency. So that's a really good idea, but it seems it's not that useful anymore. Not many receivers are jumping around. Most of us have receivers sitting on a specific band 24/7. And if we receive more than one band, we have more than one receiver. So it's the same with the transmitters. They don't really follow this around. One notable exception of this, people that still use this band coordinate scale, are the one that belongs to the International Beacon Project. They do this, use this schedule. So all of their transmitters are coordinated by the GPS time so that they transmit on the same band at the same time. And that's a pretty neat thing, because you can then take a look, so to say, on the entire planet, how the propagation on one band, say they were transmitting on the 40 meters band, after 2 minutes you will get a perfect view on how well the 40 meters band is working and what the propagation is for the entire planet, as long as you have receivers receiving on the entire planet. So they jump around. So if your transmitter is used by the International Beacon Project, you will then tick this option to jump around there. One would think that if you use this on your transmitter, that you would have better reception reports, that you would get more spots. In my findings, I don't see that. I don't see that I get more spots if I use this band coordinated schedule. So I usually just use the 2 minute default. Okay, so let's see what the last one is. Only when moving, tracker. So yeah, so this is into this heading line. It's related to this header. Transmit schedule, transmit every ... only when moving. So it means it's not a specific schedule. It's not tied to any minute. It's tied to if you change the grid square. If you are in a new grid square compared to the last transmission, it will start another round, and it will do that all the time. So this will transform your beacon from a beacon to a tracker. The Whisper weren't intended to be used as tracker. The Whisper were intended to do propagation report, antenna comparison, etc. But as the position of the transmitter, as that is included in the packet, it could be used as a tracker. So that's what this last option is. If you do that and you put it in a car or whatever, it will transmit all the time as long as you are moving along and in a new grid the whole time. If you do stop, if you have this option and stop and become stationary, it will stop transmission and only do it on top of every hour. So if you're stationary, it will transmit just 24 times in a day. So it could be a pretty useful thing. I tried it out in my car. It's pretty neat, actually. And I had a guy in the US that used it for a long trip from on the East Coast, going on the East Coast down to Florida over several days, and you could properly follow his car. It's pretty neat, actually. So Yeah, you can check that out if you want to take it biking, hiking, in your car, whatever, and it will transmit all the time, as I said. So let's go over to the next section, the location. But I'll stay here a bit because I'll deep dive into a setting in the location that is related to this tracker. So the location settings is just a few options you can do to tell the transmitter some stuff around how it sends out the location. Normally, in each packet is encoded your location, and it's only encoded with 4 letters of your maidenhead position. So you can see my maidenhead position here is JO66GG. But normally the last one GG is not transmitted. It's not included in the transmission. Normally it transmits JO66 as my position, and that's a pretty big square. It's several tens of kilometers, so you will not be able to pinpoint me exactly where I am. That is fine. I mean, if you're just using it as a beacon to figure out the propagation, you don't have to know exactly where a transmitter is. It's good enough to have it just uh, with 4 letters of maidenhead position. But if you use it as a tracker, you could increase the precision and make it transmit with using 6 letters of your maidenhead report. So you just tick that option there, and you see that now it will use 6 letters, and that's a much smaller grid size and a much more precise location. And usually if you use it as a track, if you tick that option, you usually also want to tick this send a more precise location. There's more information. If you click the IDA, you can read more about this. One downside to using this is that your transmission will take 4 minutes instead of 2 minutes. That's why you see this progress bar gets longer. So let's show that. This is regular transmission, 2 minutes, and this is the length of the progress bar. And now the progress bar is much longer. So now it will take 4 minutes for each transmission. And that's just the way it is in WSPR. If you want to send extra data, you have to send another packet that includes that data. But that's pretty neat. So you want to, if you want to try out the tracker, tick that one and that one as well. Okay, so I'll mention that precise location, but what about the location itself? Well, it's always taken from the GPS normally, if you have it in this auto mode. You can force it to something else. You can put whatever you want here, or if you have this ticked 6 letter and 4 letter. But why would you like to do that? I mean, in my book, you probably always want to be truthful and send your correct location. This case it's only here in case you want to do something that I don't know, but I don't have the full view of whatever you guys want to do with my stuff. Sometimes I get an email, could I do this because, and that could be a very niche case. One thing I could probably come up with is if you happen to live not perfectly in a grid square, but on the edge or in a corner, so that when your position jumps around a bit because the GPS is not perfectly accurate, it might putting you in another grid once in a while. And if you want to avoid that, you can then force it to a specific grid. But that's a very niche case. Usually I would just recommend to leave it in auto and it will do its job. And you don't have to figure out then where you are. Just use the GPS and it will figure it out. Okay, so we've gone over schedule, location. Let's see how in reported power. The reported power is also included in the package, and it doesn't know your power, so you have to set it. You have to tell it what power output you have. My transmitters, most of them have 200 milliwatts of output power, so 23 dBm. That's 200 milliwatts, so that's why it sits there. What if you say put an amplifier? Maybe you connected it to a 5-watt amplifier, would then pick the 5-watt option here, which is 37 dBm. Or if you maybe want to experiment with low power, maybe you put a 20 dB attenuator, you would then just put 3 dBm as the output power. So this is in these cases where you amplify it or attenuate it, and you want to be truthful and tell the receiver what your output power is. Okay, so let's speak about this last option, encode altitude as power. Some people have started to use the whisper transmission as it is a very efficient way of transmitting a few bits. They have co-opted the whisper transmitter and the information bits to transmit not these power and location data, but to have it transmit some of their data. It could be voltage, altitude, whatever, and they then co-opt this and have the power represent something else, or have the letters here represent something else. And I don't allow that currently in to send a different location. I think it's probably a smart idea to always be truthful about location, because this is primarily a propagation reporter tool. So I think it's good to be not distorting the data in the database. I think it's good to always tell the correct information about where your transmitter is. But when it comes to power, I do allow you to co-opt that to instead send your altitude. Your altitude is known by the GPS. I don't display it in this window, but it's known. And if you tick this option, it will then take your altitude and encode it as power. There is only 20 different power levels, so it will only be very coarse altitude, not very fine grained. It will be 300 meters per dBm. So and as you cannot send a single dBm, you see there is jumps from 0 to 3 to 7. So 900 meters will be the most fine-grained altitude steps you can send. So you can take that, and this is used primarily for ballooning. You could use it if you have it as a tracker in your car, but I think the primary use case would be for ballooning. And you can tick this up button here, and you can read about how the calculation is done. If you do happen to transmit a more precise location, you're sending two packages next to each other, back by back, and then the altitude will then be encoded in two packages, and each package will have a different meaning. And you can read about that in this information bubble here. But as I said, that's mostly for ballooning. And if you then want to decode that and determine what altitude your balloon is, you have to either do it manually, or you could use, there is a web page that does that for you, that can calculate your altitude on your balloon if you use this option. Okay, so let's go over the last piece of information, and that is prefix and suffix. So let's start with prefix. You can use either of these. You don't have to use them, but if you use one of them, you cannot use the other one. So let's start with prefix. So prefix is used if you're in a different region from where you usually are, and different region, different country, you can then include that. And so instead of sending I am SM7 PNV, you can indicate, but at the moment I'm in region 6. So in Sweden, the number there indicates a specific region, just like they do in Australia, where the number indicates a different part of the country. So if I, for example, went to Denmark with my transmitter, I would then send OZ/SM7PNV. And everyone would understand, okay, this is the Swedish guy, but he's now in Denmark at the moment. So that's how you use prefix. I think you're very familiar with that. There's no surprises there. But let's look at suffix instead. So suffix, when do you want to use that? Well, basically when you have more than one transmitter and you want to be able to tell them apart. So for example, if you have two transmitters connected to two different antennas and you want to compare these antennas, and you have to be able to tell them apart. You could give so that's an A and B comparison. You can the first transmitter could be A. You save that, disconnect that, connect the other transmitter, and tell that to be B, and save that, and they will then have different suffixes, and you can tell them apart when you look into the data into the database. You can see what transmitter was what, and in that case, I would probably put them on a schedule on the same schedule so that they were transmitting at the exact same time, and the propagation would then be the same more or less. So that's how you can, or I said A and B, but it could be like one antenna was a vertical antenna, and so it had /V as a suffix, so you could remember, okay, that was the vertical antenna. It could also be that you have several transmitters just transmitting at the moment. Maybe I released two balloons. My regular station will probably don't have any suffix at all, but if I release two balloons, maybe I had the first balloon called number one and the second balloon number two, and I could then tell apart my two balloons that were traveling around the world and also my stationary transmitter, what that was. So suffix is pretty useful if you have more than one going, or you want to differentiate between more than one, or you could also use it just like some people do. They put /M if they're mobile, for example, but also the downside with using suffix is the same with using a send a more precise location. That transmission will take 4 minutes. Just you see that on the long progress bar. If I remove suffix, you see I go down to 2 minutes. If I want to use it, it will force a 4 minutes transmission length. So it's a bit of a downside. So I wouldn't recommend it just to indicate M for mobile. I would not use that in that case. All right. So when I think we have gone over all the nitty gritty, all the special settings here, and there will be a third video where I can discuss some other settings here. But I think you're pretty good off now, and you should be understanding when to use and when not to use specific settings. And as I said several times, use these informations buttons and also the text that comes up when you hover the mouse to remember yourself what that settings is for. Okay, so I'll hope to catch you then. If you're still interested to know more about all the different details, see you in the third video. So I'll say 73 for now, and catch you in the next one.